Well, I'm delighted to welcome all of you. In particular, delighted to welcome our esteemed guest. We are privileged to have you here, sir, and your colleagues, the local representative here in Kazakhstan, plus your colleagues who have come to join you here today. We're particularly privileged that this is the second year in a row that we've had a distinguished guest from the IMF addressing an audience here. And I know that this was organized at a pretty short notice. So my colleagues here, Ms. Kadisha and her department, I'm very grateful to all of you for organizing this so quickly. I was saying to Mr. Boli that we are a young institution, but we're not short in ambition, nor in achievements for such a young institution, merely 13 years old, but we want to be recognized by the same standards as any other university. We're not asking for any privileges, we're not asking for any excuses. We want to be judged for the quality of the work and the contribution that we are making. I think what also makes us unique is that if you look across the world at research-intensive universities, there's something that you will find in common amongst all of them. All of them want to make a fantastic contribution to the development of talent, so education, high quality teaching, which is taking further disciplines, but also is developing the next generation of leaders, and we're committed to that. So fantastic teaching is one of our remits. We want to make a contribution to the development of knowledge, so research is fundamental to our mission. And we want to turn knowledge into innovation, improvements in public services, and benefits for economy and society. So innovation is part of the remit. And you will find those three things pretty common amongst research-intensive universities in the West, in the East, in the South, wherever it is you go. I think what particularly makes us unique is the additional two remits. One is that we have a remit to be a catalyst for reforms in higher education. It's something that we take incredibly seriously. My colleagues do, but also our students also make a contribution to this. And this contribution ranges across a broad range of fields, so including to demonstrate what a research-intensive university in Kazakhstan, in the broader region, looks like. To show what governance structures should look like, how to develop a strategy and how to implement it, how to engage students in the governance of the university, but also in their own development. So if you look at the student community and the contribution they make, it's as good as any university across the globe. The clubs and societies, the student life is incredibly vibrant, and something which fills me and my colleagues with great pride, and I'm very grateful to my colleague, Ms. Kadisha, who leads that on behalf of the university executive. But we also make a contribution through formal training of colleagues from other universities. We have well-subscribed master's programs in higher education. Many of the alumni who have either undertaken those master's programs or doctorates with us have gone on to lead other universities or to be in the second tier in other universities. And that's a contribution that we're very proud of, and we want to continue to make, and we want to build on it. And the last remit is to develop a model for integrated patient-centered healthcare. We have a medical school. It's small, but it is growing. We are just about to launch an undergraduate medical degree alongside the US-style graduate entry medicine. And once we have the undergraduate degree, I think our numbers will develop very rapidly. We have a fantastic medical school, 3-4 miles from here. We have 3 teaching hospitals. They've just acquired a standing as academic teaching hospitals here within Kazakhstan. So a university which goes beyond what other traditional research-intensive universities offer. And I think given our remit, there's a fundamental importance for us to maintain the kind of relationship we have with you, with other world organizations and with other countries. So my colleagues work very closely, very hard, very diligently in building those relationships. We're also building relationships with universities across the world, and again, Ms. Kadisha is leading on that alongside the provost and so on. We have exchange programs. And the final point perhaps to make is that there's a tendency in the universities in the south to look to the west or to look to the north in terms of partnerships. And we've done the same when we were established. We had strategic partnerships with some of the world's elite institutions. But my view here today is that we are pretty grown up. We don't need our hand to be held by somebody who tells us how to do things. We are entering into partnerships which are partnerships of equals, but also looking to the east and to the south for those partnerships. Some of the best universities in the world today don't come from North America, don't come from Europe. They come from this region. Places like Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Tsinghua University, Peking University, Tokyo University, National University of Singapore, and so on. And we're in a unique partnership with the Asian Universities Alliance of 17 research-intensive universities. We take great pride in being a founding member of that, and we're investing time and effort in building that relationship so that we can show more wonderful leaders coming out of these universities, great research coming out of these universities, and models of teaching and having an impact on economy and society, which are as good as any and which the West and the North can learn from. So that's the broad context who we are, what our ambitions are for the future. But I welcome you, Mr. Boli. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I'll be delighted to hear what you have to say. So, our distinguished guest, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad, for your very informative and inspiring introduction. I have to say, I and my colleagues are very impressed by this university with its young but ambitious achievements. Good afternoon to everyone. To be here. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today. I'm always delighted to speak with students and also professors, and more importantly, to listen to questions and concerns of students and academics. Before we have our interaction, I would like to offer a few thoughts about the region's economic future as a background for our discussion. I'm talking about the Central Asia, the Caucasus and Central Asia, CCA, what we call CCA region. The International Monetary Fund focuses on macroeconomic policies and structural reforms, which support overall economic well-being. I want to just explain briefly how we assess the economic outlook for the Caucasus and Central Asia region, and what policies can be implemented for a better future for you and for all people in the region. Countries in the CCA region have been able to successfully navigate turbulent times due to reforms implemented since their independence, which laid the foundation for macroeconomic stability. Of course, achieving macroeconomic stability is only a beginning. In order to meet the aspirations of the people in this region, much more is needed. Indeed, trend growth has declined in the region since the 2000s. Without bolder policies and reforms, it could take decades for the region to catch up with emerging European countries. There are also significant risks to the economic outlook. Global cooperation, which has benefited many countries for decades, is declining and now poses a significant risk to the global economy. In addition, the CCA region is highly vulnerable to climate change and extreme weather, as we have seen this year with catastrophic floods in Kazakhstan. So what can be done to improve the economic outlook for the CCA region and also for the globe? Economic history tells us that private sector has a central role in reaching sustainable long-term growth, resilience, and job creation. And I think these are all important topics for all of you today. Of course, the state still has a critical role to play. The state should provide a strong business environment and essential public goods and services, including by investing in people, especially young people like you. The government should also mitigate systemic risks, mobilize resources for climate policies, correct market failure, and protect the vulnerable. In the CCA region, economic diversification and growth require broad-based structural reforms to strengthen governance and competition, liberalize labor, product, and financial markets, and promote climate resilience and innovation. Digitalization also offers vast opportunities with young people eager to embrace new technologies. Our analysis shows that ambitious reforms could boost economic growth in CCA countries by 5 to 7% in the next 5 years. So in terms of the key pillars that can support economic growth in this region, I will list 4 of them. The first one is governance. Governance reforms deserve a special mention. Addressing corruption, transparency, protection of property rights, and the rule of law foster confidence in all sectors and can deliver the largest output improvements, including by increasing gains from other reforms. The second pillar, I would say, is climate policy. Climate policies are a priority. Efficient fuel pricing helps eliminate wasteful and regressive subsidies, reduce carbon emission, and generate public revenue. In turn, this helps invest in renewable energy sources, water management, resilient infrastructure, and social safety net. The third pillar I would call regional integration. Regional integration can produce benefits that can help reinvigorate this region as a conduit for transcontinental trade, culture, and innovation through the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. CCA countries are exploring how to deepen relationships with the economies around the globe and within the region. Transportation networks are essential, and regional energy markets can ensure security and create export opportunities. Finally, the fourth pillar, growth should benefit all segments of society. Protecting the vulnerable from the adverse impacts of reforms, such as energy subsidy reforms, require well-targeted social programs. For this, digitalization can help strengthen administrative capacity. So to conclude, As we gather here today to discuss the economic future of the CCA region, we recognize that this is a pivotal moment. You will be actors of new ways of doing business and governing, and I look forward to hearing from you about what you see as key priorities to ensure the region's prosperity. Let me finish by assuring you that the International Monetary Fund will remain a steadfast partner of CCA countries. Our engagement and presence in the region have been growing. For example, we opened a new center in Almaty a couple of years ago. Actually, we officially launched that center last year. It's called Caucasus, Central Asia, and Mongolia Regional Capacity Development Center, CCAMTAC. We will continue to provide policy advice, financing, and technical assistance to help our member countries in the region stabilize their economy, build stronger institutions, ensure sustainable growth, and reduce poverty. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. I would like to begin by extending a heartfelt thank you to Mr. Bolli for joining us here today for this informational conversation. We are very honored to have you with us. And I would also like to express my gratitude to our university president, Dr. Wakar Ahmad, for your opening remarks. Now let's dive into the discussion. I'd like to start with a topic that resonates with many young people today, particularly here in Kazakhstan and the broader CCA region. In your recent speech, you emphasized the need for structural reforms. As you know, many graduates struggle to find jobs that match their qualifications in Kazakhstan and in the broader region. How can the Central Asian structural reforms address youth unemployment and create more job opportunities?
Thank you for that question. Let me briefly highlight maybe three aspects that we think are important to support students, support young people in this region. We think the first priority for the government in this region is to invest in education, invest in youth education. Education investment is an investment in human capital that will have a long-term impact in the economic future of this region. So investment in education and training for young people are very important. The second, I would say, the second important aspect would be to open up the economy to private sector. As we can see from many other countries like East Asia, for example, private sector play a key role in generating jobs, generating tax revenue, and generating economic growth. And opening up the economy to private sector and also create a level playing field for private enterprises are very important in terms of generating opportunities for young people. And finally, I would say the third aspect that are important is to invest in digital infrastructure, because the young generation, they are the digital generation. They know how to navigate the digital world. And there is so much opportunity in the digital space for young people these days. So it is important for countries in this region to invest in the infrastructure that can support a digital economy. And that will generate a lot of opportunities for young people. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you for such insightful solutions. Moving on to another pressing issue. You have mentioned that climate change is reshaping the global economy. Moreover, temperatures are rising faster in the CCA, and weather calamities are becoming more frequent. Yet our region's carbon footprint is very small compared to the rest of the world, and its efforts to mitigate global climate change cannot have a meaningful impact. How can the region deal with this challenge?
The way we see it, we think the CCA region face at least two challenges in terms of climate. The first challenge, of course, is the disasters we have seen. The high temperatures, the floods, the droughts. It's everywhere, not only in this region, it's everywhere now in the world. But of course, for this region in particular, we think this region is vulnerable to climate disasters. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that even though the overall emission, carbon emission, is low in this region, as a share of the global emission, it is a very tiny share. But in terms of per capita emission, this region is actually not that low, because this region is very heavy in fossil fuel. And so per capita contribution to that carbon emission is actually quite substantial in this region. So I think this region also faces the task of how to decarbonize. So how to tackle these two challenges? We think three aspects are important. The first one is in terms of decarbonization, in terms of mitigation. We think it is important to have the proper price for carbon. Right now, the average price of carbon in this region is around $1 per ton. That's very, very low, and it's much lower than the global average. Global average now is $6 per ton, and this region is only $1 per ton. Why it is so low? Because there is a lot of subsidy in this region to fossil fuel. So it's like a negative carbon tax. So our advice is to start to phase out those very harmful fossil fuel subsidy. And that's the first step towards increase the price of carbon. I think the second thing that's important for this region is in terms of dealing with climate adaptation. We need investment. So how can we generate long-term investment in climate resilience? How to finance that investment? We think that's also important for this region. Different countries can find different ways to finance that long-term investment in terms of climate resilience. The good news is that this region has a lot of savings. Kazakhstan has national fund, a lot of savings. The challenge is how to utilize, how to invest those savings in the long-term responsible investment in climate resilience. That's the second aspect. The third aspect, I will say, is climate technology. How can this region tap into the global advancement in climate technology? Because we see a lot of encouraging climate technology around the world now. Europe, China, US, there are a lot of new technology in climate resilience and also in renewable energies. And I think it's a question for this region is how to tap into that technology advancement. One key aspect we think is free trade and investment. This region should welcome the international flow of green goods and green technology in terms of trade and investment. By doing that, this region can benefit from the global advancement in green technology, in renewables, and in other technologies can help this region to tackle the challenges of climate change. I stop here.
You've mentioned the fuel economy and also the technological advancements. Kazakhstan has long relied on oil exports for economic growth. So I was wondering what steps can Kazakhstan take to diversify its economy and what sectors show the most promise for driving future growth?
That's a very good question. We think for the economies in this region to build economic resilience, diversification is very important. A diversified economy will be more resilient to all kinds of shocks, like climate, like geopolitical conflicts. We see a lot of shocks these days in the global economy and in the regional economy. How can we tackle, how can we build resilience? How can economies be more resilient to various kinds of shocks? We think economic diversification is a key. And how to diversify the economy? We think several things are important. The first one, of course, goes back to a topic I mentioned in my speech, which is governance. We need to build a good business environment. We need to protect property rights. We need to have rule of law so that we can encourage investment in various sectors of the economy. So governance is the first step. The second step, of course, is to open up the economy to private sector, open up all sectors to private investment, not only to domestic private sector, but also open up the economy to the international investors. That's why open economy is so important. If you look at the economies around the globe, those open economies are typically very successful, like Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, right? They are very open. And by being open, you actually invite investment in all sectors of the economy. That will help you to build a diversified economy. And finally, in terms of economic diversification, as I mentioned, service sector is also important, in addition to traditional manufacturing. Because traditionally, countries in this region are very heavy in terms of mining, in terms of manufacturing. But in terms of service sector, there is a lot of potential. Service sector, for example, digital economy, a lot of the digital economy is service sector. So we need to build an environment, including a policy environment that can support the service sector, because service sector will produce a lot of jobs, will produce a lot of opportunities for young people. I stop here.
Thank you so much. And the last question from me, if the Kazakhstani government chooses to implement the solutions that you have provided before, what will be the outlook for the economy of Kazakhstan? What will be the key risks and how can they be mitigated?
Yes, in terms of outlook, currently the CCA regions, including Kazakhstan, we see a robust outlook in the sense that, last year, Kazakhstan grew at 5.1%, and this year we are projecting a little slower, 3.5%, because of the delay of the oil production. But going forward, we see a lot of potential for this region. We got a lot of potential for your country, Kazakhstan. We have a lot of young, promising people in this region, and well-educated and ambitious people in this region. So there is a lot of potential, and there is also a lot of savings, as I said, in this region that could be invested to produce a much brighter future for the region. Of course, there are also risks, right? There are risks both externally but also domestically. In terms of externally, we see a lot of, as I said, a lot of shocks globally in the last several years, right? The COVID pandemic, the geopolitical conflicts, the war in Ukraine, the conflict in Gaza. We see a lot of conflicts in the world. So there is a lot of uncertainty externally. But also domestically, we see in Kazakhstan, we see the challenge of inflation. We also see the challenges of very difficult, some of the structural reforms can be difficult because there are vested interests that oppose the reforms. So we see risks also domestically. So how can the government and the people in this country and in this region tackle those risks, to mitigate those risks? I think that goes back to the point that I have emphasized in my speech. We think it's very important to tackle those challenges, to mitigate those risks. There are several things that are important. One, we need to establish a very strong policy framework in terms of fiscal policy, in terms of monetary policy, in terms of financial policy. We need to have strong and credible policies. For example, for fiscal policy, we recommend fiscal consolidation. We recommend strong fiscal rules. And we recommend continue to amend the laws in this country so that we have strong fiscal rules that will ensure fiscal buffer, at the same time ensure long-term investment for the future of the country. In terms of monetary policy, we think it's very important we have a strong and independent central bank that can focus on controlling inflation. And for financial policy, last year we helped the financial sector in this country to have what we call financial sector assessment, FSAP, last year. And we came up with a number of recommendations to support a strong and resilient financial sector. So that will be the first part, I will say, a strong policy framework that will support a strong and resilient economy. The second important thing, as I also mentioned in my speech, which is structural reform that can help support the private sector, that can support the rule of law, that can create a clean and transparent government, that will also be part of the business environment that will support private investment. And finally, we also need to think about how to support vulnerable people in this process. When we reform the energy subsidy, when we do structural reforms, some people will get hurt. So we need to have a strong social protection for the vulnerable people so that our reform can benefit everybody in this country. I stop here.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful discussion. Now let's open the floor for student questions.
Hello. Thanks for your speech and your answers to previous questions. I just wanted to, I'm an MBA student here, and I'm also an economic researcher, and I just wanted to ask, for Kazakhstan economy, for our case, private sector and liberalization of economy is very, very important. I think that our policymakers also acknowledge that, but every time they kind of propose some kind of reforms that will, enhance economic liberalization, they face social tension, the liberalization of prices, especially given inflation, etc. How, in your opinion, how should this transition go, and what kind of reforms must, can ensure that, there is no clash, so to say? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. Indeed, it's a challenge to many countries in the world. When we try to reform, we may create social conflicts. There may be people get hurt, as I said. So I guess I will have two reactions to your question. The first one, of course, is what I already mentioned, is when we try to reform, we need to think about how to help, at the same time, how to help those vulnerable groups, those vulnerable people that may get hurt in the reform process. That's why social protection is very important. We need to build a strong social safety net so that no one is left behind in this reform process. And as I said, digitalization can help to administer those social assistance, right? If you have a good digital system, you know who's getting hurt, and you can also reach those people quickly and directly to support them, right? So digitalization, the digital government, GovTech, can be useful in that process. That's one part of the answer that I already discussed. I think another part of the answer is when we design reforms, we need to think about how can we make the reform benefit as many people as possible, and also to design a package of reform so that someone can gain from, there is something for everybody, right? You don't reform only for a subgroup of people, you reform for the entire population, right? So that's why a package of reform can help, because when you have one reform that benefits one sector of the society, you may want to introduce an additional reform or additional element that can benefit the other part of the population, right? So politically, it is useful to think about a package of reforms that can produce something for everybody. Because by doing that, you can reduce the resistance. You can reduce the risk of social conflict. So that's why a package of reform sometimes can be very useful to, create more buy-in from the general population. And that can be sometimes strategically and politically important when you design reform packages. I stop here.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you for the lecture. I do have a question regarding the goal set by the president of our country. So in 2022, he set the goal for the government to double the GDP of our country by the end of like 2029, if I'm not mistaken. So I know that the IMF, they publish their forecast, and I think that they're quite pessimistic. And I just want to know, your opinion regarding that. Do you think that we can make it, and is it possible to do it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question. Yeah, our forecast for growth this year is around 3.5%, and next year will be higher because of the launch of the new oil field. I think I have two parts of my answer to your question. The first part is that our estimate and our forecast, as you said, may not be as high as some other estimate or some other forecast by the authorities. Our forecast is based on the current, what I call production possibility frontier. That's an economic concept. Basically, based on the current economic structure and the current condition of the economy, and given all the constraints, we think the economy would grow around 3.5% for the next several years. That's what we call non-oil growth. But if you add oil, it can be a little higher, but the oil part is not for every year. And when you have new oil field, it can increase for that particular year, right? So the current economic possibility is around, non-oil possibility is around 3.5%. That is lower than what the government wants, because the government wants higher because they want to double the GDP by 2029. So how to achieve a higher growth? How to extend or expand that production possibility, right? We need reform. That's why that comes to my second part of my second part of my answer to your question, which is how to expand that economic possibility, how to have higher sustainable growth rate. And reform is very important. Reform is very important. Because without the reform, as I said, there are still a lot of constraints to the economic growth in this country. And that's why we very much emphasize the importance of structural reform, the reform of governance, the opening up of the market to the private sector, opening up the economy to international capital and international trade, and also to think about how to strengthen your financial system so that this financial system can channel your national savings into long-term productive investment, such as education, healthcare, infrastructure, and climate. So all these are important. But for all this, for this kind of investment to happen, for private sector to be willing to invest, for private sector to thrive, we need to, again, to reform, to build a business environment, to have a clean and transparent government, to have strong protection of property rights, to have strong rule of law, and also to have a level playing field for private enterprise to compete against state-owned enterprise. So all this require determined and strong reforms. If we can't put into that kind of reform efforts and to allow the economy to grow not only based on your natural resources, but based on a thriving private sector of manufacturing and service, and also to become an economy that be attractive to private investors, both domestically and internationally. With that kind of business environment, and with that kind of governance, and with that kind of financial sector, that the financial sector is also important in terms of mobilize your national savings into long-term productive investment, then your production possibility can be expanded. And 6% growth is certainly reachable.
Thank you so much. And coming to the last question from the students, does anyone have any questions?
Hello, thank you for your lecture. You said to invest into education and also into young minds of Kazakhstan. But unfortunately, many of young minds of Kazakhstan are going to another countries and perform their investment of the education in other countries. How Kazakhstan can ensure that young minds of Kazakhstan going to contribute in this country and going to develop this country?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I also see that many young people go to other countries to study, to even to live there. From my own country, China, I went to study in the U.S. after I graduated from college, and then also I lived there for several years after I get my PhD degree. I work in the U.S. and lived there for several years. But I returned to China in 2004 after spending 12 years overseas. And I returned to China in 2004 and I joined the Central Bank of China. And I worked there for more than 15 years. So I really enjoyed my work at the Central Bank of China. There are many people like me in China now. Many people studied abroad. They study in Europe, in the US, and in other countries. And they even work and live outside of China for many years. But many of them actually now return to China. And they become a very important part of the talents for China's economic growth for the last 40 years. So Kazakhstan can do the same. Even if some of the young people want to study abroad or even live abroad for some period. But again, if this country can reform, if this country can create an environment that are welcoming to investments, both domestically and internationally, that will produce a lot of job opportunities for young people. And they will be willing to come back. They will be willing to come back. Many of my friends went back to China to start their own business or to teach in universities, or like me, to join the government. And for the last 20 years, I have seen many of my friends going back, and they really excel in what they do. And some of them are very successful. Some of the biggest names in China now, they came back from overseas. They become either very successful businessmen or very famous professor, or become high-level officials in the government. Like my former boss, Governor Yi Gang of People's Bank of China, the Central Bank of China. He studied in the U.S. with a PhD. He became a professor in the U.S. Then he returned to China to become a professor at Beijing University. Then he joined the Central Bank. Eventually, he became governor of the Central Bank. So that's another example of a returnee. So my answer, I guess, to your question is that for young people, feel free to go abroad, to study and work, to learn from the world. But for your country, I would say continue to reform, to create an environment that is welcoming to people to come back, to work, to start their own business, to teach, or even to join the government.
Thank you so much. On this inspiring note, as we approach the conclusion of today's session, I'd like to ask a more personal question that I'm sure many students will be eager to hear about. What got you interested in economics, and what advice would you give our students starting their career today?
That's a very personal question, but it's a very good one. When I was in high school, I was very good in math. I took the national math competition. I got the, one of the first prize winners. So I was planning to study math in college. But I believe it's in the last year of my high school, I got a chance to talk to many of my brother's friends. My brother, he's like 3 years older. Some of his friends are studying economics in college. And I find economics fascinating. There are a lot of, I think the big background is that, that was in 1989. China just opened up, and economics become very popular, among young people, because everybody thinks, oh, it's so awesome that we could establish a market economy now. We could start to think about price, start to think about incentives, start to talk about using the invisible hands of market to allocate resources instead of the government planning. So it's all very new and fascinating to young people in China. So I was fascinated by, the names like Adam Smith, Keynes. Oh, they're so fascinating. I think this can really change the world, because Chinese, we saw in my lifetime, there's so much change in China, and over time, over a very short period of time, Chinese people become, a very poor country. Now we have everything. So that also fascinated me. It seems that economic force can really change the world. That gave me a lot of fascination. And so when I, applied to college, I think I want to study economics. That's how I got interested and also got started in economics. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for such a meaningful conversation. Now I want to invite our president here.
Colleagues and students, thank you very much. I don't know if there are students who want to have a picture taken with the esteemed guests.
We can make a group photo.
Actually, let's take a selfie. I heard Mr. Boli likes selfies.
Oh, you want to take a selfie?
Yep.